Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Here is Fairy, and you are hearing me from the Literary Nook by Fairy. So let's start our today's topic. But before going further, don't forget to subscribe my channel, share the videos with your family and friends, and like it too. Today we'll critically analyze the Act 2 or the Part 2 of Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, and we discussed it under many facets like plot developments conveyed through a series of dialogues, past life of the nurse and Nora's questions, Mrs. Linda's wrong inferences dispelled by Nora, the letter of dismissal dispatched to Kroxter, Dr. Rank's disclosure of his love for Nora, a letter dropped by Kroxter into Helma's letterbox, Mrs. Linde to speak Kroxter on Nora's behalf, the plot development in this act, Nora's decision to commit suicide, surprise or dramatic situation or suspense in this act, the use of dramatic irony, character revelation or character development, and especially the character of Helma, and the character of Dr. Rank, character of Mrs. Linde, character of Kroxter, or the four most important or the heroine of the novel, character of Nora Helma. So the first important point to be discussed is the character development conveyed through a series of dialogues. So Nora continued to be the focus of our attention throughout this act, like the previous one also. The development in the plot are communicated to us through dialogues, as we done in the preceding act. We have first a bit of dialogue between Nora and the old nurse, then a dialogue between Nora and Mrs. Linde, then a dialogue between Nora and Helma, then a dialogue between Nora and Dr. Rank, then another dialogue between Nora and Krogstad, another dialogue between Nora and Mrs. Linde, and finally another dialogue between Nora and Helma, with Dr. Rank participating in it and with Nora being left alone for a moment to express her state of mind. From the dialogue between Nora and the nurse, we learn something about the past life of the nurse. As a girl, the nurse has been seduced by an irresponsible and faithless young man and had given birth to an illegitimate daughter. So she had been compelled to put that infant among strangers in order to be able to take up a job. She had then taken up the job of a nurse in the household of Nora's father. It was this very nurse who had brought up Nora from her childhood onwards, because Nora had lost her mother when yet a small child. Nora now asked the nurse if she would bring up Nora's children also in the case the children lost their mother or deprived of their mother. So, from this question put up by the Nora to the nurse, we can infer that Nora is thinking either of running away from her husband's home or putting an end to her life in order to avoid depriving her children or poisoning her husband's home. So another things revealed in this act is Mrs. Linde's wrong inferences dispelled by Nora. Mrs. Linde has been summoned by Nora in order to help her in mending her fancy dress, which has been found to be in a damaged condition. The dialogue between Nora and Mrs. Linde centers around Dr. Rank, because Mrs. Linde has begun to feel somewhat suspicious of the role that Dr. Rank is playing in Nora's home. Mrs. Linde thinks that Dr. Rank is not a sincere man, and she advises Nora to put an end to her relationship with that man. Mrs. Linde also thinks that it is from Dr. Rank that Nora had borrowed the money. Nora tries to correct Mrs. Linde's wrong judgment in both respects, saying that she could never have thought of taking a loan from such a close friend as Dr. Rank, who comes to the house every day, and that in any case, Dr. Rank came into his money long after Nora had left the need for it. In course of Nora's conversation with Helmer, Nora requests him to allow Kroxter to keep his post in the bank. Helmer expresses his inability to do so, first because by pointing out that it is the post which Kroxter will vacate that is to be offered to her friend Mrs. Linde, and secondly by asserting he doesn't want the people at the bank to think that he can be influenced in his official decisions by his wife or by any other person not directly connected with the bank. But these are not the only reasons which prevent him from allowing Krogstad to continue his job. He gives a third reason also. He says that in their boyhood, he and Krogstad has been close friends, and that Krogstad now also behaves towards him as if he were still on terms of great intimacy with him. Even now, Kroxter speaks to him in a familiar tone, and every minute he hears from Kroxter such words as the following: I say, Halma, old fellow, Kroxter's adopting this tone of familiarity towards him when he would be functioning as the manager of the bank would cause great embarrassment to him and would make his position in the bank intolerable. So here is another important point, or the flirtatious scene is here between Dr. Rank and Nora. So Dr. Rank then comes on daily basis or daily visit to house, and from Nora's conversation with him, which follows, we'll learn a lot about Mr. Rank's circumstances and the feelings which he has been harboring towards her, as also her feelings towards him. In the first place, we learn from Dr. Rank's own lips that he has not long to live, as we have already been made aware earlier in this very act. Dr. Rank is suffering from a very dangerous disease. He expresses his deep regret that he is approaching fast and he's going to be die prematurely because of his father's youthful indiscretion. Dr. Rank also expresses his regret that after death a man is soon forgotten, and is already feeling jealous of Mrs. Lindy, who he thinks that will take his place in Nora's affection when he's dead. From the manner in which Dr. Rank and Nora talks to each other, we can perceive that on Dr. Rank's side, it is not merely a feeling of friendship for Nora, but something more. And it is also appears to us that Nora is vaguely aware that Dr. Rank is in love with her when Dr. Rank speaks of the place that Mrs. Lindy would soon occupy in Nora's heart. Nora begins to speak to him in a somewhat flirtatious manner. She first says that he will see her on the following day dancing beautifully for his sake, and then she adds the words for Tolver's sake too, of course. Then she asks Dr. Rank to sit down by her side and shows him her flesh-colored stockings, asking him at the same time to look only at the portion of the stockings which covers the feet, and then allowing him also to look at the whole length of the stocking. When Dr. Rank indirectly expresses a desire to look at her legs also, she hits him lightly on the ear with stockings and says that this is the punishment for being too naughty. So, to have an admirer who doesn't pose any real danger is very flirting and gratifying to any beautiful woman, and to Nora, there is no exception for this role. So the main event happened in this act is the letter dropped by Kroxter into Halma's letterbox. So then comes the dialogue between Nora and Kroxter. Kroxter has come to see Nora, and he would not go away without having a talk with her, definitely. It seems to Nora that Kroxter wouldn't go spare her, and this dreadful thing is going to happen, she says to herself. She tells him that she had not been able to prevent his dismissal, even though she had fought as hard as she could on his side. Kroxter tells her that he has written down an account of her whole secret about the loan and about her forgery in a letter which he now carries in his pocket and which will soon be given to her husband. Nora wants to know how much money he wants for not betraying her secret, and how much money he has demanded from her husband as the price of his not making a public disclosure of her act of forgery. Kroxter says that he doesn't want any money. What he wants is a job in the bank, and not the same job from which he has been dismissed, but a higher job so that he can really rehabilitate himself. In course of the time, he says that he can become even more important in the bank than Halma in order to acquire that importance and to become respectable in the society. So for the sake of his children, he wants a bigger post in the bank that the one he was previously holding. Nora says that he will never get what he wants from her husband. It seems to Kroxter that Nora is thinking of committing suicide. So he tells her that suicide on her part would not prevent him from threatening Helma with a public disclosure of her respect. So Kroxter then leaves, but before going away, he drops the letter which he had brought with him into Helma's letterbox, and thus bringing about a crisis in the life of Nora. In a conversation between Mrs. Lindy and Nora, Mrs. Lindy asks her if it was Kroxter who had lent her the money. Nora says yes, and then expresses her fear that Torvald will now come to know all about it. Mrs. Lindy says that it would be the best thing for both Helma and Nora that he came to know the truth. But there is another truth that she doesn't know, Mrs. Lindy. And now Nora tells Mrs. Lindy about the foggery also, thus springing another surprise on her. So Mrs. Lindy, feeling sorry for Nora, and offers to intervene in order to help Nora. And then she tells Nora of her past intimacy with Kroxter and says that she will go to him and ask him to withdraw the letter or take it back. Then follows a conversation between Nora and Helma and Dr. Rank. Nora's efforts now is to stop Helma from opening the letterbox. So she tells him that she needs his guidance and his instructions in the matter of the tarantula, and she begins to rehearse and dance, asking him to correct her movements whenever she makes a mistake. So, in fact, she intentionally makes mistakes in order to keep Helma busy. So now we'll discuss the plot development in this act. The plot developments in Act 2 may be thus summarized up like: the Nora entreats her husband to allow Kroxter to continue in his post in the bank, but Helma rejects her entreaty. In fact, he now sends the letter of dismissal to Kroxter in great haste. Second one is Dr. Rank declares to Nora his love for her, but she is not at all surprised because she has instinctively known it all along. Third one is Kroxted, on receiving the letter of dismissal, comes immediately to see Nora. He has written a letter meant for Helmer. In the letter, he has disclosed the whole secret which Nora had been hiding from her husband. Fourth one is Mrs. Lindy, on learning all the facts of the case, decided to intervene in the affair of Nora on Nora's behalf, and she goes to Kroxted in order to prevail upon him to withdraw his letter before Helmer gets the time to read it. And the fifth one is Nora inwardly decided to put an end to her life soon after completing her performance of the Trentilla. That was all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video the way we enjoyed when we created this one. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe my channel. Me Fairy from the Literary Nook by Fairy signing off.